we got a comment on an old video today. And this is a little bit sensitive, so I'll 49% of trans adults have attempted to, permanently harm themselves because there are words that YouTube won't let us say. And then it's they not accepting them, so I'm assuming trans children could literally kill the child. This is an old this is a comment on an old video with Father Malachi Martin.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not Malachi Martin. Sorry. Who is this? I recognize this priest, but I don't know his name. Anyway, go on.
Yeah. No, he's an awesome priest and he's got a lot of good
Joseph
stuff.
and Father Malachi Napier.
Yep.
That's the one. Yeah. There we go.
There's an old podcast we did interviewing him on this whole subject of pastoral care for individuals who experience gender dysphoria. This narrative is often fed by gender clinicians to the parents of gender dysphoric kids, that if you don't move forward with social transitioning, hormonal transitioning, a puberty blockade, or giving your kid permission for top surgery, then your kid is going to harm himself, whether it's self-harm or, of extreme nature, it's going to happen. And so the narrative given is like, well, look, what do you want as a parent? Do you want a living son or a dead daughter? In other words, if you're not going to let your son transition, then you are complicit in the death of that child. This is an extremely psychologically powerful narrative for a clinician to tell to a parent. And a lot of the parents who aren't well read on this actual literature will think, oh my goodness, well, I certainly wouldn't want to do that. So I guess we just need to go along ahead and whatever they say, and then that'll really help. But what's going on over in England right now, there's something called the Cass report that you can pull up and read. It's a 388-page document where they looked at, the research that was behind transitioning and then found that it was based on very low quality evidence. This idea that if you don't give kids these things, then the self-harm rates are just going to go through the roof. If this is true, that by allowing kids to transition, this rate of self-harm is going to diminish, then what you would historically have seen is an exponentially high rate of self-harm, and then the puberty blockers came, the cross-sex hormones, the top surgery, and you name it, and then this plummet of self-harm shows up in the literature once these things became available. Study the literature and you will see the exact opposite has happened. Relatively low levels of self-harm, and then as the permission has been given for puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and so on, the self-harm rates go up. In fact, studies are clear that when you put a girl on puberty blockers, testosterone, her rates of self-harm increase, not decrease. This literature is very available, but it's not being put out there. In fact, if you look at people who have gone through the transitioning process, the biggest study that has ever been done on this was done in Sweden. And what you really need to look at any study on this whole subject, how many people were involved in the study and how long-term was it? It's not enough to follow up with these people 18 months after the surgery or whatever. No, let's really stay with them for more than a decade. And what they found happens at about 8 to 10 years after transitioning, the rate of people taking their own lives goes up 19 times higher than the general population. Amongst female to male transitioners, the rate is 42 times as high as the general population. Now, trans advocates would be quick to say, well, that's because of you transphobic religious bigots. This is called the social stress model. There is some merit to it because if a person who experiences gender dysphoria is experiencing persecution and hatred from their family or faith community, obviously that would contribute to depressive symptoms. But to use that as the explanation for all the self-harm does not do justice to the actual literature. Because what the literature show is that 90% of people who die in that manner have a diagnosable mental health condition that needs clinical intervention. Puberty blockers and hormones are not the answer to that. In fact, they contribute to rates of self-harm. Read the instruction manual that comes, the patient insert packet on puberty blockers, and it says this will increase crying, anger, irritability. It's all in the literature. The drugs cause these things. And so this idea that, if we just throw the kids on the blockers, these rates of self-harm is going to plummet, the literature shows the exact opposite. That's why the tune is changing. Amsterdam, Sweden, Finland, Norway, England, all of these places, even France is starting to put bans and blockades, keeping kids away from puberty blockers. Australia is looking into do it, of all places. Spain is starting to do restrictions. And so the United States, obviously. And so it's not because these are white, right-wing, pro-conservative cultures. It's because the research is in. It's hurting the kids. And so if anyone has the courage to look at it, read the Leon Cass report. Look at the 388 pages. Read the book of Abigail Schreier, Irreversible Damage. The research is in. This is bad for the kids. This is contributing to mental illness instead of actually treating it. And so this is going to go down as one of the biggest medical scandals in history. Without doubt, the biggest one of the entire century. Remember back in the early 2020s, they actually thought that if you put kids under the knife and you gave them these life-altering drugs, that somehow they'd be spared from all these mental health issues. No, I have talked to more kids than I can count wrestling with gender dysphoria. And when you really listen well to them, the trauma that's underneath some of this stuff, the harm that's been caused, the abuse, the massive rates of autism, massive rates of major depressive disorder that preceded the gender dysphoria. That's the key. It's not that they had gender dysphoria and then the depression set in. Look at the literature. Typically, the depression is already in place. Gender dysphoria then begins to exhibit itself. And obviously, as I said, if they're being treated horribly by their own family, they're going to be depressed and they might be more likely to self-harm. And so our answer is not, well, then just throw them to the wolves. It's like, no. Listen to them. Love them. They deserve compassion, not misguided mercy from the pharmaceutical companies that are making billions off of these poor kids. Hey, if you enjoyed that clip, I'd encourage you to please like, subscribe, share, comment. That helps show it to more people. And then also submit your question at the email live@chastity.com, or submit your question or call in through our Discord server so we can talk to you in person on our next show.